nice thing about having, like, my modest little channel, not tagging videos and not trying to get 5,000 views. So I've got a nice little community that, like, watches me. So when I say I'm creating a Super Bowl, you realize that, like, I'm not saying that this is better than a English war bow or an Asiatic horn bow. I'm just kind of joshing. I'm just kind of trolling a little bit. But as I always said, the perfect bow is the bow that works, right? So I did. I wound up doing the rawhide backing on it. I love it. Love it. And I barely had to use any of my sheet of $100 rawhide bought on eBay for this bow because how short this is. I still have the big lines, the majority of it for paddle bows. They're lengthwise, and this was kind of at the top, 2 stripes down. I enjoyed doing it, and it does look beautiful. This is really nice. And doing it over the sinew lashings, I like that too. Too bad it's going to be covered up with a handle wrap. Now let's talk about a serious subject. Knowledge. Knowledge passed down over time. In my case, going back, my grandpa, who was native Mexican, didn't have any Spanish influence in it. He was actually, like native to that area. Born in the late 1800s. And I have some like late 1800s, very early 1900 knowledge passed down from him. For example, one of the reasons why he was encouraged to walk to the U.S. and get out of there, it's because when he was 11, can you imagine it? You're 11, you're big enough, you're going to go underground and work in a silver mine. Know what I mean? It was a little different back then. They weren't, I could easily get into modern politics, but I'm not going to. The point being is that my knowledge, direct, speaking to somebody, goes all the way back to the late 1800s. That's a long damn time. That's 125 years. There and abouts. And I'm not living now where I was born, but back then people typically lived where they were born, or they were in communication with generations going back, grandparents, and then in that spot, in that area, because families stuck together back then, more or less, and his is an older guy. His knowledge base, if he knew his grandparents, which he probably did, was back to the 1700s. It's a long damn time. So there is a communication chain in a lot of instances, in a lot of groups. It goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. Let's talk about bows. I have a friend. Believe it or not, I've got some friends. It has a bow hanging on his wall in his house. Being from this northern Michigan area, it is an Odawa bow, or some people would say Ottawa, but Odawa is how they pronounce it. The Odawas that I know. I have benefit of knowing many First Nations people. That bow was made in the very early 1900s by an old man who, let's check this out. Now, I'm sure he didn't just, as an old Odawa man, say, I'm going to make a bow for the first time, right? Well, First Nations people were hunting with bows in tough times until almost recent times, 1900, middle 1900s. Either get something or you're not going to eat. I was told by an elder that, on the way home from school, she would have a wagon and club animals, and bring them home, and that was their food. Name dropping Yvonne Kishik, who wears quill boxes. If you haven't seen a quill box, Google quill box. Take a look at it. She has her stuff. I hope she's still alive. She's very, in the Smithsonian Institute. Yvonne's quill boxes were in the Smithsonian Institute. And her knowledge was passed, she said, from her grandma, and her aunts, stuff like that. That goes way back, They were struggling, but they still had time to express their art. I mean, art is a part of humanity. But this bow, made in very early 1900s, like 1902 or something like that, made by an old man. His knowledge base went back to the beginning of the 1800s or the late 1700s. Things were different back then. And so that bow, I can assume, probably rightly, that is an example of a real live Odawa bow from northern Michigan. And to describe that bow, it's about this long, right? It's made out of white ash. I could tell, hey, that's white ash. Very narrow, 2-string grooves in each tip, self bow. But what struck me is a rounded back, a rounded belly. It looked like a miniature English longbow with straight through the handle and had deflects in the tips, probably from string follow like this. Like this, it had deflex tips, probably from string follow, but it's a beautiful little bow. And that bow was probably the progeny of bows made early 1800s, late 1700s, because again, the familial ties of the Odawa in that area are like this, living in the same area as the grandparents and the great-grandparents before that, so it's constant. So where am I going with this? Why am I bringing this up? Because I can look at a book by Steve Alley and Jim Ham, or any other reference, museum specimens. But it's easy to forget, which I was reminded by talking to a fellow from the Texas, Oklahoma area. I'm going to name drop Western Apache, bow maker. Yes. That this connection that goes to the past, you want to talk about bows, you talk to the First Nations bows, talk to a First Nation person, member of a tribe who is into archery, that was taught his craft by somebody older, and they were taught their craft by somebody older. So there's this common thing. You don't have to go to the history books. You don't have to go to museums. I can go to my YouTube channel and say, please, and I understand there's different cultural aspects. You might not want to leave it in comments, but you've got my Gmail, you've got my phone number, my First Nations friends. I'm really interested. I want to understand some things. And actually talking to a person and not looking at a picture book, is so much, in my mind, better. And I do believe, that's the theory in this, is that you're probably older. A lot of the fellas I talk to are older, that knew their grandparents, and their grandparents knew their grandparents in this line of bows, because you're still into archery, you're watching this channel. What better reference material is that? I'm going to have a specific request here. So, again, you don't need to leave. I'm not saying, I want you to leave your answers to these questions I'm going to ask you in the comment section, because again, I know that a lot of these things are very personal, and I do understand, because I've been working with, employing, having friends that were Native peoples, that there's a modesty about it and not just sharing stuff with the general public. But again, hopefully you trust me enough to Gmail me with the answers to these questions. I would say that I am deeply interested in, and I would not share any information on my YouTube channel without permission. Patterns, colors. If this was your bow, and hopefully you like this bow enough to say this, you'd be happy to have this as your bow or something similar, And before I ask these, I'm going to jump ahead. When I say that there's this continual chain of knowledge, the conditions in your area probably have not changed. So if you're in an area where your ancestors used short bows, you probably used a short bow. Again, inverse would be, if you're in an area where you're ground hunting in more open areas, you probably use longer bows, right? And so that would be the same going back generations. But as far as, I'm just curious, your colors, your designs, and again, I'm not going to share this without your specific permission. please email me if you don't want to leave comments, or call me. You've got my phone number. Talking to specific people, and maybe some people that haven't emailed me yet, but watch my channel. I'm just kind of curious. What would you do with this? Just asking. And I'm not going to say it needs to be just specific First Nations people. Anyone is welcome here. You know, this is my small YouTube channel, my small community. We're all interested in bows. We all respect archery, those who craft it and those who use it. And so it's not like just general public TikTok video, you know, with 500,000 views. Yeah, I'm really liking this. And it's going to be awesome when it's worked down to 45 pounds and I can like drop back a good length. The tips, kind of debating. I've seen this before. They're very narrow. You know, I don't have room to cut string grooves in, but I might just almost imperceptible, just on very low level, just kind of using a round rasp and just rasping little tiny little rasplets in there, and then parallel cut, so it's kind of like a pin knock almost, and then sinew wrap it. I like pin knocks. It's easy to unstring. Boop, just pop it off. Well, with that, I'm going to draw this to a close. I just received a text from somebody. They want me to buzz over and look at a stump. I got to see a woman about a stump. I like this. It's a cool bow. Well, thank you for your participation in this grand venture we call life. Appreciate your viewership. Thank you.